Live! Hey, I always like starting things as live so I know what's going on. Live and late, actually, but with good purpose. At least I like to think that, so. Pushing buttons around here, and we should be good to go. Literally, just got a new chair. Got it super cheap, and was just finishing assembling it right now, and it's a vastly different sitting experience than what I'm used to, so I'm just getting acclimated here while we get this show on the road. Wow, what a day. Thanks everyone for tuning in, dialing in, whatever it would end up being at this point coming around. And as I've already put it out there, this is going to be an election-based episode or a politics-based episode. I happen to know that there were just a variety of questions as they would come in or whatever that were politically based, and so I took the effort to go ahead and scoop them up and figured to compile something for today based on that because I feel it would be a really good theme. I'm going to dive right into it. For two reasons. One, there are a lot of questions. This is likely going to go longer than half an hour this time. And two, I haven't eaten yet and I'm hungry AF. So I just want to go ahead and dive into it. Open, just in case anyone's curious, that if I start munching, I bought some chocolate because I really am hungry. So I do want to get this episode out of the way, and I appreciate all the questions that people have provided that are actually related to politics, which is awesome, especially considering that as much as many people think that I'm very politically attuned, definitely still something that I am allowing myself to get more included with over the past year and change. So, where am I going to start here? I printed them all out. Yeah, I'll just go from the top here. So this first one I really, really liked. When do you get to start just being, right? Or just being Taylor, a normal person, boring yoga on Tuesday, brunch on Sunday with your friends, or insert fun, relaxing things for you here. Does it have to be you that saves the world? I don't mean that in a shitty way. I mean that in a serious, are you drawn to service sort of way. I love that question. I could tell it's based on advocacy. And that means a lot to me, right? Because it shows that there are people who recognize what I do, and they also recognize the amount of work that it takes to accomplish it. So to go first when it comes to just being, that's a fantastic question because it's something that I remember asking myself even pre-transition. Because one of my biggest challenges when it came to allowing myself to accept myself, I was speaking so many times to so many people, whether it would be peers or whether it was with the psych or with anyone else, counselors or this and that. One of my biggest frustrations is I just wanted the White House, little house, white picket fence, go buy milk, no questions asked, right, and just be aloof to the world. And then, and I was so frustrated because that's all I wanted. And that's all I wanted. And I kept asking, why can't I just have that? And then when I was reflecting on it as time went on, as I just continued to allow myself to become, I didn't want those things. I was afraid of losing how easy it was to just be a white, cisgender, heterosexual male. Even though that I never authentically lived that life because Taylor's always been inside, but to just have all of those privileges that were given to me by being a cisgender, heterosexual, white male, presenting as such. And so when I would keep asking, why can't I just have that? It's because I was so used to the comfort. I was so used to the privilege, and I was afraid of the challenge. I was afraid of the complications. I was afraid of everything that I kept hearing to be afraid about. And then the reality was, I have nothing to be afraid of because I create my own path. sure, there are obstacles, and it's up to me to decide whether or not to go over or around or stop at those obstacles. And rarely will there ever be an obstacle that stops me. Because even if there's something that's difficult to go past, I like to enlighten myself from it and realize what makes it an obstacle. What is the challenge? And if it's not something that I can accomplish in my own lifetime, what can I do to influence this obstacle so that someone in a similar path doesn't have to experience it? So when it comes to just being, everything that I do is by a necessity, but it's also because it's part of my passion. It's who I am. I've known that I've had an advocate's heart for as long as I've been an adult. I've known that. And I've said before in, I think it might have been in an earlier Dwell on It episode. If not, it was a YouTube clip that I made. But I've known that I've had the heart of an advocate since I've been at least 18. I know that. So when it comes to just being, if it comes to an idle life, perhaps, if that's the way that it's getting phrased, I actually would feel myself very uncomfortable not using my skills, my talents, my abilities, my desires, not actually applying them. So this is me just being. Now, if it comes to what a finish line could be for some of my goals, the world's not going to change overnight. I'm fully aware of that. But there's no question that I still have achievements that I'd like to accomplish, to see so that progressive change is done on a rather monumental part. One of it being to do my part to help ensure that sports all across Canada is unquestionably inclusive for transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit athletes. No question about that. Because sports are so rooted in culture that if sports can go ahead and offer that influence and show that it is all-encompassing and all-accepting, that resonates with the culture that that sport is in. And by culture, that's an open word, because that could be something as simple as a community event, right? Or it could be something as large as a professional series. But when it's all said and done, right, sports influences culture. And then when Canada can go ahead and put it very flat and simple, that blah, 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 gender sports, other countries look and be like, that's reasonable. We're doing that too. And then when that happens, then that just continues to influence the momentum of diversity and inclusion, using sports as a mechanism to show that everybody can play, everybody is valid, everybody is authentic. And there's no question about where they belong to play, so long as those athletes are safe. They're not feeling rejected, they're not feeling ostracized, they're not feeling scrutinized. Because when that's all said and done too, to recognize all the arguments about sports and trans athletes in sports, the Olympics came and gone, and the news already, the news is already out there. And then even furthering that, going back to the element of culture, we're so afraid, for example, of trans women winning so much, right? Which clearly is not even happening at the biggest of the stages, that the culture adapts, which means that trans athletes can allow themselves to come out earlier and younger, which means that those trans athletes will be supported earlier and younger, which means they will go ahead and allow themselves, if necessary, at their decision, to go on HRT, which then also interrupts the bad muscles that come along with a testosterone-based puberty, which then means that those younger trans athletes grow and develop no different than a cisgender athlete. And all of a sudden that controversy is gone, but it starts with creating the culture. It's not an overnight thing, but create the culture, long-term change. That's how it works. So other things in terms of goals of mine. Systemic failures abound left, right, and center. There's no question. We know about that. So address those failures and have no patience for complacency. The dismissiveness, the forgetfulness of recognizing injustices and the failures, the systemic failures, the systemic malfunctions, the systemic barriers. Those are simple. They are fundamentally simple things to fix. They are fundamentally simple things to address. The challenge is that the decision makers don't put it high enough on their to-do list. Or the decision makers that want to have it high enough on their to-do list don't feel like they have what it takes to go ahead and make that aggressive change. So using those two targets, I guess, is the best way to put it. Those are my passions. Sports, with no question, like I said, is a long-term culture benefit. And then when it comes to systemic failures, that's a long-term everything benefit because it's 100% intersectional as well. It is 100% intersectional. There is no place in our world for bullshit. Call out bullshit when you see it. Act on bullshit. Tell bigots to eat a rock. It's as simple as that. So getting political leaders to understand that it is okay for them to risk losing constituents, but heaven forbid those constituents are just bigoted anyway, and support stronger and safer communities for everybody that's within it, and to also get community services to start speaking up a little louder more than what's just on their agenda, to get media. I've talked about media plenty of times, but to get media to go ahead and start including trans-based topics that are not super controversial, or even if they are controversial, to accept the requirement to make sure that they're moderated so that the comments aren't flooded with bigotry. So that they do their part and be allies, not just reporters, but allies. To show visibility. Change doesn't happen without visibility. Change does not happen without discussion. Change doesn't happen without conversation. And change doesn't happen without a demand for need. So those are goals. Maybe something else will come up one day someday. Who knows? But those are unquestionably passions of mine. And I can't turn it off until I start to see progressive change about those and know that I've done my part to contribute. Would I like to one day just be able to play a video game and not feel guilty about not doing something otherwise? Absolutely. Would I like to be able to spend my free time not going through all my emails, blasting everybody and then some, going all the way to the annals of time, so that I can make sure that they're aware and their voice matters and their voice is powerful and their voice is wanted? Or for me to stop going ahead and looking for more volunteers and more workers to work on HireWheller, for example, so that we can continue to advance this project? Would I like to be able to do those things? Absolutely. That's not to say I don't live a normal life, though. Anytime that if anyone, like for last week, for example, right? I was at the beach. Hey, Tate, you want to go to the beach? Absolutely. What time? Let me put it in my calendar. Right? 100%. I still live a normal life. I still live a life that involves myself to see my peers, talk to my peers, see my friends, make dinner, right? And like things like that. I can still go ahead and live that normal life. And my passion, though, is what's in the back of my head, like I mentioned earlier. Some people, their passion, for example, is art. Right? Some people, they're all of their free time is about developing some new form of art. Beautiful things. Some people love to go ahead and be out at, whatever, I don't need to explain it. But when it comes to living that normal life, absolutely. Absolutely. The challenge that I really express about why do I keep advocating and why does it seem so encumbering is because it needs to be done. This is work that has to happen. It must be nice to come from a place where that's not something that's front of mind. This is front of mind, though. And it's not front of mind because I've just found an automatic passion for it. This is directly related to my quality of living, and I'm taking my lived experience and making sure that I'm doing my part so the next person in line doesn't have to go through the exact same experience. That's why I do this all the time. That's why I go and go and go. And that's why it's not stopping anytime soon. So when it comes to the fun, relaxing things, even just to put on there, absolutely. Going to the beach last week was fantastic. Making dinner for a friend last week too, just awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome to see her and just hang out. Hey, hi, how are you? Right? And just have, again, a sense of normalcy. It was awesome to just be able to do those little things. Even when it comes to work, I'll go ahead and, I'll be working on whatever, and I can still listen to some of my favorite streams, right? Or listen to music, or I can sing along. Well, those little types of things too. Absolutely, there's always a little piece of normal life always happening, but when it's all said and done, my free time, the free time that I have that is not committed to anything else, right, is 100% on doing my best to make sure that our world becomes a stronger and safer place for transgender individuals, right? And then using that momentum to also create an intersectional dialogue so that anyone else who's experiencing something similar to this can take this experience and turn it into an asset for them too. Does it have to be me that saves the world? I'm not a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm not saying I'm the key to making everything better. That's never going to happen. However, everything that I do is with the goal of impacting other people positively. And if that means other people's worlds become better places because of the things that I do, for sure. I'm not going out of my way to be the person to make sure that someone else feels like they've got a safe life exclusively, because we've got other great and influential individuals who have done monumental things in terms of giving trans individuals a stronger representation in our world. I always look at Quinn, for example. Quinn, seriously, think about it. Quinn, not only the first, it's just unbelievable, the first open trans athlete to compete in the games, just by the nature of scheduling. And so trans non-binary athlete. They're also the first transgender non-binary athlete to be guaranteed a medal, and the first transgender non-binary athlete to win an Olympic gold medal. How awesome is that? How influential is that for Quinn? And everything that they have accomplished to help show that trans athletes are valid and trans athletes are winners. Just unbelievable stuff. And that's not even counting the two other competitors who were in the Olympics. This past Olympics, we had 3 transgender athletes, out transgender athletes. For all we know, there might be more who haven't come out. But this year's Olympics also had that, if I remember correctly, the most 2 LGBTQIA plus athletes. And if I also remember correctly, that if they medaled as one nation on their own, I think they would have came in 7th or something like that. How awesome is that? So I'm definitely not the only person changing the world, but I am doing everything that I can with the tools that I have and with what I know to create meaningful change, because it's well-deserved. And if I sit around and twiddle my thumbs while other garbage is happening and don't do anything about it when I know I have the means to, I'm doing not only myself a disservice, but everybody around me who deserves my strength, right? I need to do my part. So yes, right? That I know it's not a shitty way. Am I drawn to service? I am. What's my goal, or what is your goal with HireWheller? Are you trying to get it to a small business or not-for-profit organization, or do you have other plans? That's an awesome question. I'm not opposed to the idea of enterprising it at some point or another. Absolutely. Obviously, what I need for that is to have a I want to make sure that within the volunteers, before I flip the switch to something that becomes something that, like I said, is not for profit, for example, I want to make sure that there ends up having a core that is able to transition, pardon the pun, accordingly with that, because obviously there's a lot more stuff that comes along with it, right? As soon as you go not for profit, then you start to include things like being able to receive donations and then taxes, and you have to have, if I remember correctly, because I glanced at it, but then to have something similar to a board of directors, for example, and so on and so on. I'm not afraid of the paperwork, but I want to make sure that before anything like that happens, there's continued momentum, and then also an established team to go ahead and, like I said, flip the switch as seamless as possible. Otherwise, right, when it comes to my goals, one of the biggest things, kind of like what I was alluding to earlier, that so long as there becomes visible, what's the word I'm looking for, autonomous? Like, when change is realized so that it doesn't always need to be perpetually prodded, that to me is a win. And then that's like, it's okay to see something like HireWheller maybe not necessarily dissolve at that point when we see systemic change be a success. But it's not as, like, let's put it this way, I'm not doing Greenpeace, I'm not doing something like Advocacy International or anything like that, because Greenpeace exists and Advocacy International exists. They've already got those roles filled. So I'm more than happy to use this experience, for example, as a launch pad if I ever have an opportunity to do something larger, for sure, maybe. But I also have just my own life too, and same thing with other volunteers as well, right? That when it comes to the volunteers, that's the key word. It's not a full-time job, right? And so this is something that is a lot for others to handle, and I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about where we're going forward. And so in the meantime, as HireWheller is continuing to do its work, it 100% is in the interest of providing this experience to create meaningful change, and then also be to be a resource for other individuals experiencing something similar to help them get through their experience as well. So when it comes to the goals, like I said, the end game is to see like structural change, right? Like systemic change. And if that doesn't happen, and I've got the means to go ahead and flip the switch to do something that's actually a little more paperwork oriented, sure, why the hell not, right? When it comes to something like a small business, right, then that too, I don't want to sell these as services, for example, but again, depending on how things go going forward, it might be something to commission experience out, right, or to work as a consult, for example. Again, right, like I'm certainly open-minded to a bunch of paths. It just kind of depends on what happens with the paths first. What do you or a HireWheller need me to do for help? So this is awesome when it comes to the election, because as I mentioned, this was a politically based episode, and as the other two questions were politically oriented, this is actually a fantastic one, because with an election called now, there is a lot of conversation that is not COVID exclusive happening. Over the past few months, not even the past few months, let's say about 18 months, we're getting close to 2 years when COVID started to be a thing, right? But nonetheless, that over the past few months especially, COVID has always taken front and center when it comes to conversation. And not even just in conversation, right? But it's almost the only thing you see in media. Everything's related to COVID. And I obviously don't want to dismiss that, because COVID's obviously a very relevant thing, right? But in terms of creating any sort of conversation that's outside of something COVID related was challenging, because it wasn't sensational enough to be discussed, simply put. So now that there's an election, that more topics are enabled for conversation, and actually more topics are required to be talked about, because political leaders, right, and elected officials are going to be using different topics as platform elements to discuss. Which is why something like this is a fantastic example of things to talk about with political leaders, elected officials, or even anyone who's looking for about any candidates, for example, and so on. Because if they know that a higher higher quality of CSR is a value for you, and that they'll earn your vote if they have a plan in effect about maintaining a higher quality CSR to have stronger and safer communities, right? That becomes a conversation. That actually becomes something that they might platform, for example, and that becomes something for other people to hear and recognize, right? It's easy to amplify the message using the situation right now. So when it comes to do for help, this is an awesome time to make sure that anybody talking politics knows the value of a stronger CSR to ensure that there are safer and stronger communities. Just expected, not just provided, but expected. It's a value. It's not a nuance. It's not a treat. It's a value. It is 100% a value. So that is something that is a great example to start. And so also with that, as I mentioned about COVID, I've been personally keeping things a little quiet, aside from just everything else that I've got going on with life anyway, and that's been okay because the momentum of all the conversation has been about COVID restrictions, policies, vaccine passports, and some tree running or some building running down trees. Essentially, that's the long and short of the news, right? That if it's not COVID, it's about COVID, and that's the long and short of all of the conversation. And so by bringing something like this constantly into that argument, it's just going to get quelled out because it's not as sensational enough for everybody to want to automatically embrace. As much as something like an improved CSR is 100% relatable to every person out there, it's something that not everybody automatically thinks about. Everybody is thinking about COVID, right? So there's no question that trying to get into, hey, pay attention to me situation regarding that is almost a waste of labor, right? It's a waste. And so with that, and I don't want to call it a waste of labor, right? But I'm sure everyone understands where I'm going with that. That it's not important. It's just not important enough to be acted on as soon as it could/should be, and because of that, it often gets tabled or falls off the desk by the time it's right to come back around. So bringing everything back up now, right? Turning the burners up a little bit, right? To go ahead and offer some volunteer time, for example. If you've got some assets that you're able to provide, whether it's something like being able to offer some time and space for social media, to make sure to be engaging with social media, to whether that means with followers or to help scout out other individuals, to go ahead and post articles, for example, of relatable situations, to expand on other platforms, such and such. I've mentioned a few of these things in, I think it was episode 3 with Ina, but just other things for people to diplomat with other types of similar grassroots groups, to go ahead and use that same type of momentum and share those assets together. There's a lot, right? But otherwise, when it comes to that, well, I can even go further. For anyone who understands everything that's been going on, which helped inspire HireWheller, for people who have experience with political, with legal, with police, if people have direct connections when it comes to community services, to use their platforms to amplify messages, to go ahead and offer outreach to those locations and ask why they're not using their platforms and their strengths, to see where I'm going here? There's a lot for everybody. So what can you do to help? First, offer the opportunity, right? To say you're able to, and to say what you're comfortable and not comfortable with, what you're able to do, how you want to do it, how you want to participate, because it's also not exclusive to Winnipeg. It's hardly exclusive to Winnipeg. The conversation is fully intersectional, and with that, it's actually also international. There's nothing to say that meaningful change only has to happen within 50 miles from here, realistically. So wherever you are, right, you can go ahead and offer meaningful change, right, to anybody who's got the ability, to anybody who's willing to listen. You can offer this same dialogue and participate with that. So there's a lot of things when it comes to what everyone can do for help. And like I said, that I'm totally open to adding more and more people on our team, because now that the conversation is able to not get so drowned out because of COVID, this is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of it, and I'd really appreciate to see more people participate with that. These ones are starting to get fun now. Has Bill C-16 affected how you're able to live? I'm going to pull it up and read not all of Bill C-16. C-16. So for anyone who's not familiar with that, they understand what it's about. So, Bill C-16, Royal Assent on June 19th, 2017. This enactment amends the Canadian Human Rights Act to add gender identity and gender expression to the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination. The enactment also amends the Criminal Code to extend the protection against hate propaganda set out in the Act, that any section of the public that is distinguished by gender identity or expression, and to clearly set out that evidence that an offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate-based or gender identity or expression constitutes an aggravating circumstance that a court must take into consideration when it imposes a sentence. Can I have some chocolate? So when Bill C-16, how it affected how I'm able to live, I don't feel like it changes how I walk to the store and buy groceries. That's pretty simple. And I don't think that it affects how many people use their brains or lack thereof in terms of respecting who I am as an individual. I don't think that. I highly doubt that somebody with a brain smoother than a mug goes, oh, shoot, I can't say those things I want to say because Bill C-16 protects Taylor. I don't think that the smoothness allows those thought processes. So does it directly affect my life? Not really. But what it does do is give me the opportunity, and not even me the opportunity because it's already there. It's been there for, 4 years now. That, what flavor is this? Sea salt. That should there ever be a need to have a conversation with police, lawyers, RCMP, judges, explaining how a situation that is affecting my life is biased because of transphobia, that is now an accepted argument as of 2017. That is very easy to go ahead and present the experience that is happening, be like, this is transphobia, and then they can go ahead and use that when it comes to sentencing, for example. It's not just random jeers against queers. It is deliberate hate-based execution, right, of behavior against I don't want to use the word protected class, right, because I don't want to sound like whatever, but it's what it says. So does it affect my quality of living? Personally, what it does for me is it inspires me to continue kicking platforms in the ass who aren't recognizing it, to say that it is literally in the Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. And I'm not just talking about police, but I am talking about all platforms that have an opportunity to address meaningful change, right? To recognize that this is an example of something that is far too often overlooked. And the fact that it's still it was only in 2017 that it got royal assent is more than enough of a reason to remind platforms, remind media, to remind police, to remind everybody else that there needs to be more education because this isn't the same world as it was in 1991, for example. So that's how it's affected my life. It doesn't affect my day-to-day. It doesn't affect my direct quality of living. It doesn't even really affect my just what I think or what I do. But it gives me something to lean on when I kick platforms in the ass as to why they need to do their part. Because they need to get caught up to speed. Because things, for example, in the Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code don't really do much if people aren't aware about it, right? So that's how it affected me. Personally, I love it. I love it. Definition of identifiable. I'm just scrolling down here at this point. It's actually a quick read. Enacted in the Human Rights Code, Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. Canadian Human Rights Act. 1. Section 2 of the Canadian Human Rights Act is replaced by the following. Purpose. The purpose of this act is to extend the laws in Canada to give effect within the purview of matters coming within the legislative authority of Parliament to the principle that all individuals should have an opportunity equal with other individuals to make for themselves the lives that they are able and wish to have, and to have their need accommodated consistent with their duties and obligations as members of society without being hindered or prevented or hindered in or prevented from doing so by discriminatory practices based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sexual orientation, sex, gender identity or expression, marital status, family status, disability or conviction of an offense for which a pardon has been granted or in respect of which a record suspension has been ordered. Subsection 3.1 of the Act is replaced by the following. Prohibited grounds of discrimination. For all purposes of this Act, the prohibited grounds of discrimination are race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, marital status, family status, disability, and conviction for an offense for which a person has been granted or in respect of which a record suspension has been ordered. Criminal Code, subsection 3:18(4) of the Criminal Code is replaced by the following. Definition of identifiable group. In this section, identifiable group means any section of the public distinguished by color, race, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or mental or physical disability. Subparagraph 718(2)(a)(i) of the Act is replaced by the following. Evidence that the offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor, and then it goes on and on and on from there. I love it. I've always loved it. And sometimes when people, knowing the experience that I've been going through, and they ask how I am about it, I know the big picture. Simple as that. Why is Bill C6 an issue? Now let's pull up Bill C6. And what's the most recent one? June 22nd. This is crazy that it's only on its third reading. An act to amend the Criminal Code, conversion therapy. Summary. This enacts amendments to the Criminal Code to, among other things, create the following offenses. A. Causing a person to undergo conversion therapy without this person's consent. B. Causing a child to undergo conversion therapy. C. Doing anything for the purpose of removing a child from Canada with the intention that the child undergo conversion therapy outside Canada. D. Promoting or advertising an offer to provide conversion therapy. And E. Receiving a financial or other material benefit from the provision of conversion therapy. Why is this an issue? C6 is not an issue. The fact that it has not yet got royal assent is an issue. Like, I'm sure that was just phrased in that sort of way, and so, and by the way that the question was asked, but and what's funny is when I say this is a no-brainer, the people who are keeping this from actually getting automatically Like, there's no reason this shouldn't be unanimous. So for everyone who's voting no, is definitely a no-brainer, right? Because there's nothing in there, because they clearly don't know how to articulate the words yes. Conversion therapy is horrible. And like, I grew up from kindergarten to grade 8 going to a Roman Catholic school, and definitely didn't undergo conversion therapy at the time. But one of my absolute biggest fears of knowing that I was in the wrong place, literally and figuratively, that I would be told that I'm wrong, and everything that comes along with it. I didn't even need to know about conversion therapy existing, which I definitely wouldn't have at that age. But to know, because of the environment that I was raised in, that I automatically would have been told, no, you're wrong. This is wrong. Everything about you is wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Be better, do better, change, etc., etc. The fact this doesn't have royal assent is just... Here's the preamble. Whereas conversion therapy causes harm to the persons and in particular the children who are subjected to it. Whereas conversion therapy causes harm to society because, among other things, it is based on and propagates myths and stereotypes about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, including the myth that a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression ought to be changed. And whereas in light of those harms, it is important to discourage and denounce the provision of conversion therapy in order to protect the human dignity and equality of all Canadians. The fact C6 has not yet received royal assent is an issue. What's your position on Bill C10? I'll read Bill C10. Bill C10, type properly. Ah, that was a long fucking summary. Jesus. An act to amend the Broadcasting Act and make related and consequential amendments to other acts. Let's get to the point that I care about. I'm looking. There's a lot. Oh, whatever, I'll read the summary. This enactment amends the Broadcasting Act as to other things. Another things. To add online undertakings for the transmission or retransmission of programs over the internet as a distinct class of broadcasting undertakings. Update the broadcasting policy for Canada set out in Section 3 of that Act by... Sorry. Apparently poutine was being eaten out of the Stanley Cup. Set out in Section 3 of the Act by, amongst other things, providing that Canadian broadcasting system should serve the needs and interests of all Canadians, including Canadians from racialized communities and Canadians in diverse ethno-cultural backgrounds, and should provide opportunities for Indigenous programming or Indigenous persons programming that reflects Indigenous cultures and that is in Indigenous languages, and programming that is accessible without barriers to persons with disabilities. C. Specify that the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission must regulate and supervise the Canadian broadcasting system in a manner that takes into account the effect of... you know what, it's long. Just seriously Google it. Right? Google C10. There's a ton of points. But anyway, you know what? The reason why C10 comes up all the time, over and 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 over that I tend to see is because it's going to be government-based propaganda, amongst other things. The second being like penalties for hate speech. So listen, I'm just going to get past C10. I'm going to address those two things. For anyone who thinks this is going to be a unique example of catered information that gets to you, holy shit, get out from under your fucking rock. Simply put, get out from under your rock. Like seriously, your phone, for example, where do you think those advertisements come from? Based on your own experience. It's automatically catering information that you would want to see, which is how it would be phrased from the government anyway. This is important to you and you want to see it. So you know what? If you have issues with that, right, but you don't have issues with ad scoping you out, there's an issue. And then even aside from that, do you not think that people around you, do you not think that your peers, do you not think that your employer, do you not think that anybody within arm's reach of you curates the information that you hear based on satisfying your needs or exclusively on what they want to peddle? It's not a unique experience. It is not a unique experience. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're from, what you do. What is said to you is likely coming from a manipulative standpoint from somebody who thinks that you're too weak to recognize that. So seriously, just take whatever at face value. I'm not saying to go ahead and be like, well, I'm thinking like, I've got like North Korea in the back of my head, but like to not recognize that the amount of information from so many sources legitimately being biased already in the first place is nuts. Look at newspapers. There are newspapers that are very clearly left-wing and right-wing if you actually look at it, which is why some newspapers or some media organizations might seem a little out of touch for you because they're pushing information that you don't want to hear. So, and yeah, I understand when it comes to stuff like media, you can go ahead and choose to read the media or not, but the point is, how many people actually grab that? And furthering that, let's talk about CBC or whatever. Turn fucking CBC off then, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, right? But there's a lot of just argument of irrational levels because I look at the hate part now. The constant arguments that I've seen about, well, they're over-regulating hate speech. I have never once in my life feared the consequence of hate speech because I don't talk like an asshole. So maybe, if you're complaining about the right to say what you want because you're afraid that your bigotry will actually have no place in society, I'm sorry, not really resonating with that. Not really vibing with you right there. Not really finding a lot of sympathy or empathy for your problems. Must be nice that one of your biggest concerns of the day is, oh, if I say bad things to someone, I'm going to get in trouble. Shucks. So what's my position on C10? If C10 helps regulate hate speech, put it through. I don't fucking care about the rest. Because people need to realize that there's a consequence to thinking that you're better than somebody else. And I'm 100% okay with that. I don't know if it's directly related to C10 or if there was another bill that was being yapped about not terribly long ago. Can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But it was in April. I think it was in April. Based on one of my campaign emails, not HireWheller, right? But it was just some of my own projects with some of my own advocacy and whatnot. Before HireWheller was getting started up there, but it was more of an exclusively me thing. And I received, an email asking if language that I provided, if in my own email, could be taken to Parliament. And from what I understand, that it was provided to the Minister of Culture and Diversity, I think is what the position is. It might have been related to, the development of C10 or not. I don't know. But the advocacy emails that I was sending was about trans visibility, trans rights. And so for my own language to be taken, used, right, with permission, of course, I was asked if that's okay, but to be provided to Parliament to explain why hateful conduct and online abuse need to be addressed at a bigger and better fashion, right? Anything, I'm on board with it. Bring it. Do it. Because honestly, when it comes to anything about content or whatever, first, it's fantastic. If they want to go ahead and make sure to amplify the messaging when it comes to the indigenous methods, right? Like when it comes to language, to make sure that it's got opportunities for more indigenous people and everything that also I was mentioning there, right? To include that more. 100% okay with that. Everything else is just to me, it's just whining. We're in a world where the government controls us. There's no question about that. We are in a world where the government controls us. Use what we can use. Change what we can change. But to think that you're not getting specifically curated material or product or whatever it would be already by some other method is just beyond me. Seriously. I saw that you said that you registered to speak against Bill 64. Yeah, I saw that you said you registered to speak against Bill 64. What do you plan to get across? This is provincial now. Bill 64. Bill 64. So Bill 64 is called the Education Modernization Act. Now, considering that there's a lot of hullabaloo, let's put that as a simple word, with Manitoba's provincial government now, Bill 64, pardon me, might end up actually just getting scrapped before it's my turn to speak about it. But let's pretend it doesn't. The biggest thing that got my attention about 64 was, well, let's put it this way. What is Bill 64? The Education Modernization Act is the enabling legislation that will be used to achieve some of the government recommendation included in the K-12 Education Review. Once it receives proclamation, Bill 64 will replace the Public Schools Act and the Education Education Administration Act and the Community Schools Act, the pieces of legislation currently governing education in Manitoba. What is proposed in 64? proposed the elimination of democratically elected school boards. The 36 English school divisions will be continued under a single board that would administer education within 15 regions. This is an example of something that, in my opinion, is significantly louder than C10. Because what that means is that the education would be determined on the current residing government. And that has such a crazy long-term effect. Because if 64, for example, went through, and knowing how the PC government is, well, they don't like anything progressive. They like money and they like themselves, right? They, and what they would end up, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Alberta, didn't their government remove dinosaurs from their curriculum? This is an example of how fucked it is, right? And so for 64, for example, to address sensitive topics, which clearly means that they would make sure to abandon any conversation or any visibility of 2S LGBTQIA plus individuals, to abandon anything regarding racism, to abandon anything regarding any sort of disabilities, to, it's fucking nuts. Like, how else do I need to explain it? And the challenge with that is by putting that into the education system means you're going to be developing a young and impressionable group of people who then won't know any better. Which then means that instead of going forwards, we go backwards. And then that also means that by limiting that type of education, that also reinforces that type of governance. Because that's the only thing that'll be known to vote for. The end game is super clear. It's fucking disgusting. So what do I plan on getting across? Calling a duck, right? Like, I don't think I need to be the person to go ahead and explain the technical details, let's put it that way, when it comes to teachers and the school board and values of those, but to use my lived experience as an example and to specifically say, just imagine if that was the experience their child had to go through, and then you're okay with your own government saying that, too bad, so sad. That's an issue. That's a huge issue. It's a fucking mess. It's a goddamned mess. And realistically, I've recognized I've recognized Bill 64 not really being something that they were really planning on executing anyway, because 64 was enough of a distraction for people to yell about, while Manitoba's government in power would just do their little side bills anyway, because people were all distracted about COVID and 64. It's a chess piece. I think it's close to 500 people already registered to speak about it, maybe more, maybe less, but like, there's going to end up being a point where the message is just repeated over and over. And it's none of these messages are going to automatically influence any of the decision makers. It's pretty simple. It's really simple. That there's not going to be a moment of revelation that any of these individuals will get. So I don't think there's too much to worry about. I think it's going to wrap up at an hour, but I'm going to run with it just in case it doesn't. I don't see an error message yet saying to wrap up. So I've got 3 more questions here. I'll try to zoom through them. is it okay if I ask what party you vote for? The last time I voted PC. Right? I voted blue. But also in that time, I was still struggling to accept myself, and I wasn't allowing values that truly were important to me to come to the front, straight up. Because I was still in denial with my own reality, and I was trying to fit in. Overall, though, like, a lot of values just in terms of, like, looking at a federal level, Marty Morantz, I've not been disappointed. Easy. But this upcoming election, I'll see what's up. Simple as that. I'm not married to a brand, never married to a brand, ever. And so when it comes to something like that, I'm confident I know who I'm going to be voting for. But again, one of my biggest things is I want to see what an elected official will do for me. And all of the elected officials in my area are very aware, or at least they should be, of stuff that's important to me. And if they choose to act on it, would absolutely influence my decision as to who I'm voting for. So, simple as that. Like, Marty Morantz, for example, when it came to sports, like I was talking about addressing meaningful change about trans athletes in sports, it was me reaching out to him asking if he would like to sponsor a petition that I would consider doing. Not a petition, but whatever, if he would sponsor me. And we had a meaningful discussion that led to me getting connected with individuals at Sport Manitoba, which, let's just fast forward, I'm a volunteer on a committee with Sport Manitoba, right? That was certainly influenced by being a slightly squeaky wheel, and the reasoning behind that he said, was to use Manitoba as a mechanism to show that it can be done. And then not only can be done, but fundamentally how easy it can be done. Because it is a lot easier to go ahead and create federal change when it's easy to just point at a province. And so instead of essentially asking the entire province or the entire country as a whole to systemically readdress how they manage sports, to then go ahead and when it's time for chit chat, to be like, look, Manitoba's doing it, right? And when you say, hey, Manitoba's doing it, then everyone goes, oh, what the fuck, I'm going to do it too. And it's way easier to implement in that sense. So I'm grateful for him about that. I'm not honor bound about that at all. But like I said, that I'm going to wait and see what is coming about. And like I said, I'm pretty confident about who I'm voting for. But like I said, my most important thing is who's going to go ahead and actually represent what's important to me. If advocacy is so important to you, why don't you get into politics? I'm not a politician. Simple as that. I would fail at politics. And the reason for that is because I really don't feel like pinching cheeks is probably the best way to put it. Like when it came to COVID, especially when it comes to businesses who are struggling at the time and whatnot, and still are, right? But it's like I would have wanted to say what needed to be said. We don't have the money to pay you, period, right? Or we don't have the money budgeted to pay you. Instead of dancing around reasons or whatever otherwise, it's stuff like that. And to not be able to say that without somebody being like, shh, you can't, shh, that, like, it just doesn't vibe. And then the challenge as well when it comes to being in politics is, I'm not gonna lie, right, the tokenization. If like a lot of things that I do, of course that there's influence about, like, of course a lot of my advocacy is rooted in the fact that I'm trans and I'm using my lived experience to create meaningful change, for sure. But everything that I talk about is completely intersectional. And the challenge is that we're still not at a place in our society that would look past being trans. And that's frustrating. So I don't want to earn votes automatically because I'm trans. But, oh yeah, no, yeah, I am queer. I'm going to vote for Taylor because, yeah, trans, which is cool, and I appreciate that. But there's more. There's more than being cut from a similar cloth. There's more. And then equally enough, I don't want to have to fight for votes that I lost because I'm trans, even though that my values would be the same as someone else. It's kind of a weird paradox, but I'm sure we understand what we're saying. I've considered it. I've been asked. I could see myself easily working alongside somebody. Maybe when some other other projects and whatever are off the table, maybe I'd consider it. I don't know. But like I said, that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to being a politician is to bullshit. Right? And like, that just ain't my vibe. Or pardon me, to not bullshit. Yeah, to bullshit. Yeah, because like I said, that like, we don't have the money budgeted for you, I'm sorry. Would have been something so simple for me. But no one ever wants to hear that, right? Or no one on your campaign wants to have to explain it, whatever, anyway. So that's why I'm not directly in politics. But that, like I said, is what I focus on is something that's not party related either. There's systemic failures. It doesn't matter what the party is. They are systemic failures. I don't need to campaign and platform to address systemic failures. So I'm just going to continue to do that. If you could implement or change one law to make this country safer for transgender individuals, what would it be? I love that one. I'm having a piece of chocolate for that. While I eat this chocolate, take a guess. You probably don't know. Yesterday I snacked on one of those in about 4 or 5 minutes. This one's actually lasting. It's the first time I had that with sea salt. Tasty. If I can implement or change one law to make this country safer for transgender individuals, what would it be? Taylor, you're obviously going to address cyberbullying. No, I'm not. Not to say that those laws don't need to be reviewed. Cyberbullying doesn't affect everybody. Those who it does affect, affects in a very harmful way, for sure. But that's not big enough. And then it also includes subjectivity, and so on and so on and so on. So what would I do? I've said this before about sports, way back when. So let's approximate 0.5% of Canadians as transgender. It's a rough number because there's not much firmly documented about it, but let's ballpark 0.5% of Canadians as trans. And because it's a ballpark figure, that we're also going to now assume that all demographics, right, whether it becomes from, whether it's a race, right, whether it's income, whether it's from certain cities or provinces or whatever, because we don't have anything firm and we're assuming 0.5, let us assume 0.5% across the board, that every single demographic we look at, 0.5% of those individuals are transgender. So, that then also means 0.5% of Canadians their taxes come from transgender, or 0.5% of Canadians are transgender and contribute taxes accordingly, which then means approximately 0.5% of all of our taxes are rooted from trans sources. The federal government, and I'm only talking GST, right? Because PST, of course, is unique and local, but because it's for the country, I'm going to assume across the board. But nonetheless, though, that the federal government, their tax revenue that they accommodate, then also distribute some of that money to provinces as well. So nonetheless, though, there's a big tax smoothie, right? A tax revenue smoothie, and 0.5% of that come from trans people. Who knows from who specifically, or from where, or whatever, but 0.5% of that is from trans individuals. So therefore, all organizations, facilities, and services, institutions, whatever, that receive federal tax funding or utilize services provided with federal tax funding are to, well, let's put it this way. If they opt for gender definitions in their environment, to also include visibility statements regarding the acceptance and inclusion, transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit individuals, or to remove gender policy overall. Simple as that. If trans individuals pay taxes, trans individuals deserve as equal services, facilities, whatever, just like anyone else. And so if any organization, facility, or service wants to receive tax funding or utilize services that are provided by taxes, if they're going to do gender definitions, however it is, even washrooms, it could be sports, it could be clothing stores, whatever, to make sure that there's a visible inclusion policy, as I mentioned, or to remove gender definitions entirely. Or lose your funding or lose access to services. Oh, but what happens if they need to hydro, plumbing, police, etc., etc.? Well, I guess you kind of need to put that signage up, right? That's why I would make that a law. That affects everybody. It introduces visibility, purely objective, takes all the subjectivity out of it, all the beliefs, all the whatevers. No question. If I pay taxes and you pay taxes, we should be dancing the same dance. No questions asked. I love that question. That was great. That was an hour and 15. Thanks for everybody who was able to hang in, to watch all the way through this. And I'm going to wrap up because I've got a Zoom call to jump into. And I hope everyone enjoyed this, what did I call it? Election episode. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your night. Okay, bye.